of me, Emily whispered. But Logan Pierce was already laughing, his hands wrapped around her crutches. The carbon fiber snapped. The sound hit like a gunshot. She fell into the mud while 300 students stood watching and did nothing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Not one person. If you believe that one act of cruelty can define a life, or that one stranger can change everything, subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story and all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Emily Carter had a rule she never broke. She did not ask for help. Not from professors who offered to carry her bag up the stairs. Not from classmates who lingered a second too long at the elevator, waiting to offer their arm. Not from the two women at her church who always seemed to position themselves near her whenever she stood up from a pew. She thanked each of them, politely declined quietly, and moved on before the conversation could turn into something that looked like pity. She had learned early that pity was the one thing she could not afford. Because once someone pitied you, they stopped seeing you. You became the chair, the symbol, the cautionary tale they whispered about when they thought you were out of earshot. She had watched it happen to other people, and she had made herself a promise the day she walked out of the rehabilitation center. At 17 years old, she would never become someone's sad story. She had enough of her own. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years before the day her life changed again, in a university parking lot. Emily was in the passenger seat of her father's truck, halfway through a bag of pretzels, arguing with him about whether a certain band from the 90s counted as classic rock or just regular old rock. Her father, Daniel Carter, had strong opinions about music. He always had. He would turn the radio up too loud and tap the steering wheel with 3 fingers, like he was playing a drum kit only he could hear, and Emily would complain and he would laugh, and the world would feel exactly the size it was supposed to feel. Then the light turned red, then the truck from the side street didn't stop. Then everything that mattered in Emily Carter's life rearranged itself into before and after, in the version of before the girl who argued about music with her father on a Tuesday morning, the girl with 2 working legs and a parent who loved her like oxygen. That girl did not survive the intersection. Daniel Carter died at the scene. Emily survived with a shattered left tibia, a fractured pelvis, and nerve damage that the doctors explained to her mother with careful voices and charts that neither of them wanted to look at. The surgeons did what they could, then the physical therapists did what they could, then the insurance did considerably less than it could, and the bills arrived, and Emily's mother, Sandra, a woman who had never in her life raised her voice above a polite conversation tone, sat at the kitchen table one night and stared at a number on a piece of paper for so long that Emily got up and walked slowly, painfully, dragging herself on the metal crutches the hospital had given her to sit across from her and cover her hands with her own. "We're going to be okay," Emily said. It was the first time she had lied to her mother. It would not be the last. The metal crutches were temporary. Everyone said so. Temporary until the bones healed correctly. Temporary until the nerve damage resolved itself. Temporary until Emily got stronger and the pain got smaller, and the world stopped feeling like it was made of glass. But the bones healed in ways that left her with a permanent limitation in her left leg, limited range of motion, chronic pain that flared with cold weather and long-standing, and a kind of fatigue that lived in her hip and never fully went away. The metal crutches became regular crutches, which became a part of her daily life, which became simply the way Emily Carter moved through the world. She did not waste time grieving the legs she used to have. She had other things to do. She applied to the university's engineering program at 19. She got in. She moved onto campus with a single duffel bag, a laptop with a cracked corner she'd bought secondhand, and a set of the same metal crutches she'd been using for 2 years. Her dorm room was on the 2nd floor of a building with a working elevator that only broke down twice a semester, which she told herself was fine. Her first-year classes were spread across 3 buildings on opposite ends of campus, which she told herself was also fine. The walk took her twice as long as anyone else. She left 40 minutes early for everything and arrived exactly on time. She told her mother things were wonderful. She told her mother the campus was beautiful, which was true. She told her mother the professors were excellent, which was mostly true. She told her mother she had made friends, which was the second lie, and then the third, and then eventually just the story she had decided on. She was not without connections. She had study partners and project teammates, and the woman at the coffee cart near the engineering building who remembered her order. But friendship, the kind that involves someone knowing your actual life, the kind that costs something that she had quietly decided she did not have time for. She was in school on a combination of scholarships and loans. She worked 12 hours a week at a small grocery store 3 blocks from campus, stocking shelves during the evening shift, because the store manager, a quiet man named Gerald, who had once been a nurse, didn't mind accommodating her pace and let her use the break room stool whenever her hips started acting up. She was saving money. Every paycheck, every tip from the one shift she sometimes covered at the register, every dollar that didn't go to food, or her share of the campus housing she'd eventually moved into, all of it went into an account she had labeled, with complete private sincerity, the project. The project was not a class assignment. It was not something she had talked about with any professor or advisor. It was the thing she thought about during the long walks across campus, the thing that kept her sitting at her desk until midnight, working through material that would not be on any exam. Emily Carter was studying engineering, not because she wanted a good job, though she needed one. She was studying it because she had seen, in her own life and in the lives of others, she had noticed the way you notice people. When you are also someone who gets noticed, that the equipment that changed lives was almost always the equipment that poor families could not afford. Her metal crutches were functional. They kept her moving, but they weighed nearly 7 pounds, and after a full day of classes and work, that weight lived in her shoulders and her arms, like something that had taken up residence and refused to leave. She had done the research. She knew that carbon fiber crutches, properly fitted, ergonomically designed, built for her specific height and weight and gait pattern, would reduce that load by more than half. She knew what that would mean for her pain levels, her endurance, her ability to study at night without her arms shaking. She also knew they cost just over $2,000. For 8 months she saved. She did not buy new clothes. She wore the same 4 rotating outfits and thanked the universe they were machine washable. She stopped going to the campus cafe. She cooked rice and beans in her room with a hot plate and called it meal planning. She worked extra shifts when Gerald would give them to her and showed up early even when he didn't ask. She sold 2 pieces of furniture she didn't need. She watched the number in her account climb the way you watch a thermometer when someone you love has a fever, slowly with enormous concentration willing it to move. The day she placed the order, she sat at her desk for a long time before she clicked confirm. When the crutches arrived, she stayed up until 2 in the morning and adjusting the fit, running her hands over the smooth black carbon fiber, feeling how impossibly light they were in her hands. She stood up. She took 3 steps. She stopped. For the first time since the accident, she stood in a room and did not feel like she was fighting the equipment. She felt like she was just standing. She called her mother. It was 2:15 in the morning and Sandra picked up on the second ring, because Sandra always picked up regardless of the hour. And when Emily said, "They came, Mom, they fit perfectly," Sandra was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Tell me what they feel like." And Emily stood there in the dark and described them the way her father used to describe a perfect song, and neither of them mentioned that Daniel Carter was not there to hear it. The problems with Logan Pierce had begun in October, 3 weeks into the new academic year. Emily had been on campus 2 years by then. She was junior year level in her coursework, taking an advanced structures class that met in the newest building in the engineering quad, a building with good elevators and wide corridors, and she had noted with gratitude actual ramps that seemed designed by someone who had thought about the people who would use them. She was doing well in the class, not just passing, actually well. Her professor, Dr. Anita Forsyth, had pulled her aside after the 3rd week to mention that her analysis on the load distribution problem set had been, quote, unexpectedly elegant. Emily had not told anyone about that either. Logan Pierce was not in her engineering class. He was in her orbit, the way certain people are present enough to matter, meaningless enough that you wish they weren't. He played on the university's football team, which gave him a kind of campus gravity that Emily had observed without particularly caring about. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of physically confident that comes from years of being told your body is an asset. He moved through spaces as if they belonged to him. He laughed loudly. People gravitated toward that laugh the way they gravitate toward warmth, even when the heat source is something burning. The first time he said something to her, she genuinely thought it was an accident. She was crossing the open plaza between the science building and the student union, and he was walking in the opposite direction with 2 of his teammates, and he said loud enough for his friends to hear, "Careful, the crutches might not like the rain." His friends laughed. Emily did not stop walking. She told herself it was ambient noise, the kind of thoughtless remark that people made when they were performing for an audience and didn't really see who they were performing at. The second time she was less sure. The third time she was certain. It escalated in the way that casual cruelty always escalates when the target does not react in a way that satisfies the aggressor. Emily's refusal to respond not from dignity, though she told herself that, but partly from the genuine uncertainty about whether responding would make things worse, read to Logan as permission, as an invitation to continue, as proof that this was harmless, because nothing that didn't leave a mark could be considered serious. And Emily Carter walked away every time without flinching. So what was the problem? He started filming short videos, posted to social media accounts that Emily did not follow, but that people she passed in the hallways apparently did. Footage of her crossing campus narrated in a voice that was calculated to stay just barely within the range of what could be called humor, if you squinted at it hard enough. Comments about her pace, about her crutches. One video, the one that got the most engagement. The one that she found out about from a girl in her structures class who told her with the specific kind of apologetic grimace that means the situation is worse than the teller wants to be responsible for conveying, involved him mimicking her walk for an audience of laughing teammates outside the athletic center. Emily had watched the video alone in her room at 11 o'clock at night. She sat very still for a long time after it ended. Then she closed her laptop and went to sleep because she had a problem set due in the morning, and she was not going to let Logan Pierce take her GPA along with everything else he was already taking. She had not reported it. She told herself that was a strategic decision, that the university process was slow and uncertain and potentially humiliating, that it would draw more attention, that it would give Logan an argument about oversensitivity that she did not have the energy to fight. She told herself she was choosing her battles. She understood somewhere deeper and quieter than the place where she kept her strategic decisions that she was also afraid. Not of Logan Pierce specifically. Of the moment where she asked for help and discovered that the help was not coming. She had built her entire life around not reaching that moment. The afternoon it ended, or the afternoon it broke, depending on how you measured ending, was a Thursday in March, cold for the season, with a gray sky that had been threatening rain since morning and finally began delivering it around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Emily had finished her last class at 1:50. She was moving through the engineering building's main exit, adjusting her bag strap, her new carbon fiber crutches moving with that smoothness, and she still noticed with gratitude every single time when she heard his voice behind her. "Hey, crutch girl, wait up." She kept walking. "I'm talking to you." The voice had an audience. She could hear that before she turned around, the particular quality of words being spoken for people, not at someone. She stopped walking. She turned. Logan Pierce stood with two of his teammates, all three of them with phones already out. Not lifted to record yet. Just ready. The way you keep a lighter in your hand before you need the flame. "I heard you got new equipment," Logan said, looking at her crutches. "Those look expensive." "I need to get to my car," Emily said. "I'm just making conversation." He stepped forward. "Can't someone make conversation with you? Or is that too hard?" One of his friends laughed. The other was already raising his phone. "Logan," Emily kept her voice flat. "Stop. Stop what I'm not doing anything." He tilted his head. "You know what your problem is? You can't take a joke. You've never been able to take a joke. I'm just a guy saying hi to someone on campus. That's it. If you're going to be out here in public, you have to be able to handle people saying hi." There were students around them. 15-20 people in the immediate vicinity of the engineering building's main entrance, moving between classes, cutting through on their way to parking. Emily clocked them the way you clock exit signs when you're in an unfamiliar building, automatically, because it was now an instinct. None of them were moving closer. None of them were intervening. None of them were meeting her eyes. "I'm leaving," she said. She started moving again. Logan stepped to her left and put his hand on the shaft of her left crutch. The movement was casual, almost conversational, like he was steadying something that had nearly fallen. But his grip tightened, and when Emily pulled back, the crutch did not come with her. "Let go," she said. "Or what?" His voice had changed, not dramatically, he was too smart for dramatically, but enough. The playfulness was still there, surface level, performing for the camera. His friend was now definitely recording. But underneath it was something older and less interesting, A person who had been doing something for months without consequence and had stopped believing that consequences were possible. Let go of my crutch. You're so serious, he said. I'm literally just holding it. I'm not hurting you. She pulled again. He pulled back. She felt the shift in her balance immediately, the sudden redistribution of weight to her right side, the protest from her hip, the specific kind of panic that lives in the body of someone who has learned in the most permanent possible way what happens when the ground stops being reliable. Please, she said. The word cost her something. She knew it as she said it. She could feel it leaving her the way you feel the moment you spend $1 you were saving for something that mattered. Logan heard it. He looked at her face, really looked the first time she could remember him actually looking at her rather than at the camera or the audience, and something moved behind his eyes, something she couldn't name. Then he stepped back. He kept the crutch. He looked at his friend on his right, then at the other friend who already had his hand on the second crutch, and Emily had not even seen him move, had been too focused on Logan, and the sound of the two crutches meeting the pavement was not the dramatic crash she would have expected, but something quieter. A sharp clinical crack as Logan brought the first one down against the stone step's edge, and then the second. And the carbon fiber that had cost her 8 months of grocery store hours and pretzel dinners, and not replacing things she needed, broke the way expensive things break when someone who has never saved for anything in their life decides to be careless with what someone else built. Clean, final, gone. Emily fell, not dramatically, not the way falls look in films. She went down slowly, the way you go down when your body is already compensating and the compensation runs out. A controlled collapse that wasn't controlled enough, and she hit the ground on her right side, her palm catching the wet pavement, and she was in the mud because it had been raining. Because of course it had been raining, and her bag had come open, and her papers were spreading, and she could feel the cold water through her jeans, and she was looking at the broken pieces of the crutches on the ground in front of her. 8 months, she looked at Logan. He was laughing. His friend was still filming. The 20 people who had been standing in the vicinity of the engineering building's main entrance had become 30 and then 40 because crowds accumulate the way weather accumulates, and not one of them was moving. Not one of them was speaking. Not one was walking toward her or toward Logan or toward the crutches on the ground or the papers spreading in the water. They were watching. They were witnessing, and they were staying exactly where they were. Emily Carter, who had not cried since the rehabilitation center, at 17 years old, who had reorganized her entire life around the proposition that she would not need anyone who had spent 5 years making herself strong enough to refuse every offered hand, sat in the mud outside the engineering building and felt something break inside her that was not the crutches and was not her leg and was not anything the doctors could assess or chart or fix with time. It was the last piece of the belief she'd been carrying. The belief that if you were strong enough, if you were self-sufficient enough, if you never asked for help, the world would at minimum leave you alone. She had done everything right, and she was still here, in the mud, while they watched. And then from somewhere across the parking lot, she heard a sound. Not voices, not sirens, not the sound of someone finally moving through the crowd to do what should have been done immediately. An engine, a single motorcycle engine rolling low and steady into the parking lot. Emily did not look up right away. She was still gathering her papers, still trying to figure out the logistics of standing, when she had nothing to stand with, running the math of what she could reach, what she could use, how she was going to get home. The engine sound registered as background noise, the kind of ambient campus sound she trained herself to filter out. But then Logan Pierce, who had been laughing, went quiet, and the laughing stopped. Emily looked up. The motorcycle had pulled to a stop at the edge of the parking lot. The man on it was older, not elderly, but the kind of age that settles into a face and stays. Gray hair short, a face that had been outdoors in all weather for a very long time. A black leather vest that even from a distance had visible patches, the kind of patches that meant something specific to people who understood what they were looking at. He wasn't looking at Logan. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Emily. He got off the motorcycle with the deliberate steadiness of a man who moved at his own pace in all circumstances. He walked through the crowd, which parted not because he demanded it, but because something about the way he moved made parting feel like the natural response. He walked past Logan, who said something Emily didn't fully catch, something that involved the word grandpa, and was designed to land as an insult and landed instead on nothing. He knelt down, right there in the mud. In his vest and his boots and his everything. He knelt down and looked at Emily Carter at eye level and he said, "Where does it hurt?" He asked her where it hurt, and Emily Carter did not know how to answer that question. Not because the answer was complicated. It wasn't. Her right palm was bleeding from the pavement. Her hip was screaming the way it always screamed when she fell wrong, that deep, specific pain that lived below the bone and above the nerve and had no clean name in any medical chart she'd ever read. Her shoulder had taken some of the impact. The cold water had soaked through her jeans and was working its way up through her jacket lining. And the mud had gotten into her bag and onto the papers she'd been carrying, papers that represented 6 hours of work she was going to have to reconstruct from memory. All of that was true, and none of it was what hurt the most. "I'm fine," she said. The man looked at her. He did not move. He did not accept the answer and stand up and leave the way she half expected him to, the way most people did when she said she was fine, because most people wanted permission to stop worrying about her, and "I'm fine" was that permission. He stayed exactly where he was in the mud at eye level and looked at her with the kind of patience that doesn't come from politeness. It comes from having seen enough of the world to know when someone is lying and choosing to wait them out anyway. "Your hand is bleeding," he said. "It's not bad." "I didn't say it was bad, I said it was bleeding." He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded bandana, dark blue clean. He held it out. "Name's Jack." Emily looked at the bandana, then at him, then at the bandana again. She was 22 years old and she had spent 5 years making herself into someone who did not need things from strangers. And the simple act of a man holding out a piece of cloth in a parking lot was making something in her chest feel dangerously unsteady. She took it. "Emily," she said. "Emily." He nodded like he was confirming something he had already suspected. "You need help getting up, or you want a minute first?" Behind him, Logan Pierce had moved back about 6 feet, not gone, not willing to fully retreat in front of whatever audience had gathered, which was now considerable. Students accumulating the way they always did when something was happening that nobody was willing to stop but back. His friends had lowered their phones, not because they felt bad, because the man kneeling in the mud had a presence that made filming feel less like power and more like something that might later require explaining. "I'd like my crutches," Emily said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Whatever's left of them." Jack stood. He walked to where the broken crutches lay on the pavement, not hurrying, not performing, just moving with the straightforward economy of a man who knew where he was going and picked up both pieces. He looked at them for a moment. His jaw tightened in the way that strong, controlled people's jaws tighten when they are making a decision about what they are going to do with something they feel. Then he walked back and crouched beside Emily again, setting the pieces down in front of her. She looked at what remained of 8 months. The carbon fiber had sheared cleanly at the point of impact. The handles were intact. The shafts were split. The custom ergonomic grips she'd had fitted specifically to her hand size were undamaged, which was, she supposed, the particular cruelty of a clean break. The expensive parts were fine. The structural parts, the parts that made them useful, that made them more than expensive decorations, were gone. "Those were good crutches," Jack said without judgment. "They were," she said. Logan's voice came from behind them. "Look, man, this is a private situation. You don't need to get involved in something you don't understand." Jack did not turn around immediately. He finished what he was doing, which was helping Emily gather her papers from the wet pavement with a careful, methodical attention that suggested he was in no hurry to engage with Logan Pierce on Logan Pierce's timeline, and then he stood and turned. He was not a large man, Emily registered that. He was average height, average build, the kind of physical presence that didn't announce itself loudly. But there was something in the way he turned, in the complete absence of performance in his body, that made the space between him and Logan feel suddenly very different from what it had been. "You broke her crutches," Jack said. "It was an accident. Her hand is bleeding. She fell. I didn't push her. You took her support away, in the rain, while 30 people watched." Jack's voice was conversational, the volume of a man ordering coffee. "And you filmed it." Logan's jaw moved. "You don't know what's been going on between us. There's context." "There's always context," Jack said. "In my experience, the word context shows up most often from people who did something they know was wrong." One of Logan's friends started to say something. Jack looked at him. Just looked. The friend stopped. I need to get her home, Jack said. He turned back to Emily. I have a truck, 10 years old, nothing fancy, but it gets from one place to another without drama. You want a ride, or you want me to call someone? Emily looked at him. She looked at the 30, now closer to 50 people standing in a rough semicircle around the entrance to the engineering building, all of them watching, most of them with the particular expression of people who were very interested in something they had already decided was not their responsibility. She looked at Logan, who was recalibrating, reassessing, trying to figure out what kind of situation this had become. She looked at her broken crutches. A ride, she said. If it's not too much trouble. It's not trouble, Jack said. He offered his arm, not in a solicitous, hovering way, but practically the way a person offers an arm when the math of the situation calls for one. She took it. They moved through the crowd together, him adjusting his pace to hers without drawing attention to the adjustment, which was the thing she noticed, because most people who adjusted their pace to hers made it visible, made it an act of accommodation that required acknowledgement, and the crowd parted. And Logan Pierce said nothing, and his friends said nothing, and 50 people who had watched the whole thing said nothing. The silence followed them all the way to the truck. It was as advertised, 10 years old. A Ford F-150 that had seen serious use, not neglect, the difference being that neglect was absence and this was presence. A truck that had been driven hard and maintained honestly. He opened the passenger side and Emily got in with the efficiency of someone who had been managing the logistics of entering vehicles for 5 years and did not need or want assistance beyond what the door provided. He walked around to the driver's side and got in and sat for a moment without starting the engine. Where am I taking you? He asked. She gave him the address of her apartment. He nodded and started the truck. They drove for 2 minutes in silence, and then Emily said, "The patches on your vest. What about them?" "Hell's Angels." "That's right." She was quiet for another moment. "Then I'm not sure how I feel about that." Jack almost smiled. She could see it in the corner of his face, the slight compression at the edge of his mouth. Most people aren't. "Are you going to do something to Logan Pierce?" "I haven't decided yet what needs doing." He glanced at her. "What do you want done?" It was such a direct question. She sat with it, turning it over. Nobody had asked her that, not in the 5 years since the accident, not in the months since Logan had started, not in the parking lot 40 minutes ago when 30 people had watched and nobody had moved. Nobody had asked Emily Carter what she wanted. "I want people to stop treating me like I'm not real," she said. She hadn't planned to say that. She heard herself say it and recognized it as the truest sentence she had produced in several months. Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I know something about that." They drove another block. The rain picked up. "How long?" he asked. "How long has he been doing it?" "Since October." 5 months. Roughly. "And you didn't report it?" "No." "Why not?" She looked out the window. "Because I didn't want to be the girl who couldn't handle it." Jack said nothing to that. He didn't agree, didn't argue, didn't offer her the standard reassurances about how reporting was brave and she shouldn't feel that way, and her feelings were valid. He just let what she'd said exist without rushing to fix it. Emily, who had spent 5 years surrounded by people who wanted to fix things as quickly as possible so they could stop worrying, found the silence almost shockingly comfortable. "Your crutches," he said eventually. "Those were custom made. Carbon fiber, specifically fitted. I saved for 8 months." The muscle in his jaw moved again. "On what kind of money?" "Grocery store wages, plus whatever I could cut out of living expenses." She paused. "I ate a lot of rice and beans." He was quiet for a long moment. The truck slowed at a light. He looked straight ahead. "I had a sister," he said, "younger. Maria." Emily waited. She had cerebral palsy. Not severe. She walked, she talked. She was the sharpest person in any room she ever walked into. But she needed equipment. The kind that's designed for her specific situation, not the generic stuff that sort of works if you sort of fit the standard measurements. He stopped at another light. "We grew up without money. My parents both worked constantly, and it still wasn't enough to cover what Maria needed. She spent years using equipment that wasn't right for her. The wrong chair, the wrong supports, the wrong everything. Because the right things were too expensive and the insurance wouldn't cover them, and there was no program that helped." Emily turned to look at him fully now. "She passed away 8 years ago," he said. "Not from her disability. Complications from something unrelated, But I spent a lot of years watching her struggle with things that were harder than they needed to be because the world decided her kind of need wasn't worth the cost. He glanced at Emily. When I saw what those boys did to your crutches, I thought about Maria, about all the fights she had trying to hold on to equipment that let her live her life the way she deserved to live it. The truck stopped in front of Emily's apartment building. Neither of them moved to get out. "What are you going to do?" Emily asked. "Right now, get you upstairs if you'll let me, then figure out what you need for tonight." "I meant about Logan." "I know what you meant." He turned the engine off. "I'm going to think about it tonight. I'll think about what's useful and what's just anger, and I'll figure out which one should be in charge." He looked at her. "That's what it took me a long time to learn. Anger shows up first, but it's not always the right one to send." She sat with that for a moment. Then, "What if I told you what I really wanted wasn't just for Logan to face consequences? What if I told you what I really wanted was to not have to fight this alone?" Jack looked at her. "You won't," he said. 2 words. No elaboration. No promise ceremony. No grand declaration. He said it the way you say something that is simply true, the way you state a fact about weather or distance or time. And Emily believed him in the specific way you believe someone who isn't performing belief for your benefit. She believed him because he hadn't asked her to. She got into her apartment with his help. Practical, efficient, nothing unnecessary. And he stayed 40 minutes while she changed out of her wet clothes, and he made tea in her kitchen with the quiet self-sufficiency of a man who was comfortable in spaces that weren't his. He found the mugs on the first try. He didn't ask where things were. He just looked and found them the way people do who spent years learning to be present in unfamiliar environments. They sat at her small kitchen table, and Emily talked. She hadn't meant to. She had spent 5 years curating what she shared and with whom, building elaborate filters between her interior life and the words that came out of her mouth. And then this man sat down across from her with a mug of tea and looked at her with the uncomplicated attention of someone who had nowhere else to be, and the filters stopped working. She told him about the accident, not the summary version, not the edited for public consumption version, but the real version, the pretzels, the argument about music, the Tuesday morning, the sound of the truck from the side street that she still sometimes heard in the space between sleeping and waking. She told him about her father, about what Daniel Carter had been like, about the specific quality of his laugh that she could still hear perfectly and was terrified of one day being unable to remember. She told him about her mother, about the kitchen table and the number on the paper and the lie she had told, "We're going to be okay," and how she had been telling versions of that lie ever since. She told him about the engineering degree and what it was actually for, the dream she hadn't told her professors or her study partners or anyone who might feel obligated to have opinions about it. The goal of designing affordable mobility equipment that families like the one she'd grown up in could actually access equipment that fit the people who needed it, rather than requiring those people to simply manage with whatever was cheapest. Jack listened to all of it. He asked one question: "What's the name of the thing you're trying to build?" Emily blinked. "I've been calling it the Carter Project in my notes, after my dad." She paused. "It's not a real name yet. It's just what I call it when I'm thinking about it." Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My sister's name was Maria, if you ever need a second name for it." Emily looked at him. Something moved through her that she did not try to name. Outside, the rain was heavier now, and the city was doing what cities do in the rain, slowing down, retreating indoors, pulling the edges of itself together. Emily looked at the broken crutches she'd brought up and propped against the wall by the door, and she thought about the 8 months and the rice and beans and Gerald letting her use the break room stool, and she thought about her father, who never got to see her walk through the doors of the university he had been so proud she'd been accepted to. "I need to figure out how I'm getting to campus tomorrow," she said. "I know someone who can lend you a pair for the next few days. Not carbon fiber, but solid." "How do you know someone who has spare crutches?" "I know a lot of people," Jack said. "That's one of the things about riding for decades. You accumulate a certain amount of people who have things." He stood picking up his mug and rinsing it in the sink with the unself-conscious practicality she was starting to recognize as simply the way he did everything. "I also know a man who does custom fabrication, metal carbon composite, retired engineer. He owes me." Emily looked at him. "You're not going to offer to pay for them?" "No," Jack said. "You'll handle that when you're ready." That's yours. He set the mug on the drying rack. What I'm offering is the connection. Who you call it with is up to you. She nodded slowly. Jack. Yeah. Why are you doing this? He picked up his vest from where he'd hung it on the back of the chair. He put it on the way men put on things that are part of them without thought, without performance, as naturally as pulling on a familiar gravity. He looked at her. Because I drove past a parking lot and saw 30 people watching a young woman sitting in the rain, he said. And in 30 years of riding and fighting and making every kind of mistake a man can make, the one thing I've figured out for certain is that the moment you decide to keep driving is the moment you become someone you don't want to be. He moved toward the door. He stopped me, he added quieter, one hand on the doorframe. Someone stopped me once when I was in the mud. Not literally, but someone showed up when I had decided nobody was going to. He turned back to look at her. I've been paying that forward for a long time. It's not complicated. It seems complicated, Emily said. Most things that matter seem that way from the outside, he said. He left her with the borrowed phone number for the man with spare crutches, with the tea still warm on the table, with the broken carbon fiber pieces by the door, and with the specific strange feeling of a person who has spent years building walls, discovering that one of the walls has a door in it she didn't know was there. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark, running back through the day. The parking lot, the mud, the sound of the carbon fiber. The 50 witnesses who had looked and looked and looked and done nothing, and something kept pulling her back to the moment before she'd looked up and seen the motorcycle. She had been alone. Completely. Not in the romantic, independent way she had constructed around herself. In the real way, the cold, actual, undeniable way. She had been sitting in the rain outside the building where she was learning to design equipment for people who couldn't afford to be as alone as the world required them to be, and she had been exactly as alone as anyone could be. And then she hadn't been. That's simple. She thought about the 30 people who had watched. She ran through the faces she could remember and tried to give them reasons they hadn't understood. They'd been afraid, they hadn't known what to do. She gave them every benefit she could construct. And then she sat with the fact that none of those reasons changed what happened, which was that they had been there and chosen the same thing over and over every 30 seconds. For the full duration, they had chosen to stay still. She thought about Jack Walker, about his sister Maria, about a family without money trying to get the right equipment and coming up short because the world had decided the calculus differently. She thought about her father's laugh. At some point before 2 a.m, she picked up her phone and sent her mother a text message. Not the sanitized version, not the "I'm fine, Mom, everything's fine" version. Just something happened today. I'm okay. Can we talk tomorrow? Her mother replied in 40 seconds, despite it being past midnight, of course. Call me whenever. I love you. Emily set the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She did not know yet what Jack Walker was going to decide when he thought through the anger and the useful and figured out which one should be in charge. She did not know yet what the next day would bring, or what Logan Pierce was doing right now, or whether the footage that had been filmed in the parking lot was already circulating in ways she couldn't control. What she knew was the tea mug rinsed and left on the drying rack. What she knew was 2 words: you won't. What she knew was that somewhere in this city, a man with gray hair and a leather vest with Hell's Angels patches was sitting with whatever he'd brought home from today, turning it over, applying the long-practiced discipline of separating anger from useful, and deciding what someone who had refused to keep driving was supposed to do next. She didn't know what that looked like. But she stayed awake long enough to find out that the thought of it, the simple, staggering thought of not being alone in this, was enough to let her breathe. And that night, in a quiet part of the city that Emily Carter would never be able to identify, Jack Walker sat at his own table with his phone in his hand and sent a message to a group that had existed for decades. A group of men who had made every kind of mistake and learned most of them the hard way, what it meant to finally get something right. The message was short. Tomorrow morning. Full chapter. I need everyone who can make it. He set the phone down. He looked at the window for a long time. Then he said quietly to no one in particular, but to a sister who had been gone for 8 years and whose face he could still see perfectly and was not afraid of forgetting. This one's for you, Maria. The replies started coming in within minutes. By midnight, he had 43 confirmations. By 2 a.m, it was 81. By the time the sun came up over the city on Friday morning, Jack Walker had 130 brothers who had decided the same way he had decided in a parking lot the afternoon before that they were not going to keep driving. Emily woke up at 5:50 in the morning to three things. The first was the particular ache in her hip that cold nights always delivered the deep interior pain that no over-the-counter medication fully touched, the kind she had learned to greet. The way you greet difficult weather, acknowledge it, adjust, move forward. The second was her phone buzzing with a text from her mother sent at 5:43, "I'm up when you are." The third was a pair of borrowed crutches leaning against her apartment door that had not been there when she fell asleep. She stared at them for a full 10 seconds. There was a note tucked under the left grip. Handwriting that was direct and undecorated, the handwriting of someone who had never been interested in penmanship as performance. From Bobby. He says they're aluminum but well-balanced. He also says he's sorry about your other ones. Jay. She did not know who Bobby was. She suspected she did not need to. The way you don't need to know the name of the person who built the bridge you're walking across. What mattered was the bridge. She picked up the crutches, tested the height someone had pre-adjusted them, and whoever that someone was had gotten it exactly right on the first try and stood. The weight was different, heavier than the carbon fiber, lighter than her old hospital pair. She took 3 steps across her kitchen floor and had decided they were workable. She had operated on workable before. She could do it again. She called her mother. Sandra Carter picked up before the first ring had fully completed, which told Emily everything about the night her mother had spent. Emily had sent a text at midnight saying something had happened. She was okay, and she understood now in the clear light of 5:50 in the morning that those 3 words, something happened. Okay, had almost certainly guaranteed that Sandra Carter had not slept. "I'm fine," Emily said, and then caught herself and said, "No, I'm not fine, but I'm not hurt. Let me tell you what happened." She told her. All of it. Not the sanitized version, not the version that protected her mother from worry, not the version where Emily Carter had everything under control and didn't need anything and would handle it herself. She told her about October and about the videos and about the 5 months she had not mentioned any of it because she hadn't wanted her mother to carry more than she was already carrying. Sandra was quiet for a very long time after Emily finished. Then she said, "Emily Ann Carter, those 5 months. I know. You carried that alone for 5 months. I know, Mom, because you were protecting me." Emily said nothing. "Baby." Sandra's voice shifted into something that was not quite crying and not quite anger, and was instead the specific frequency of a mother who loves her child so much that the love has nowhere left to expand, and so it turns into a kind of pain. "I am your mother. You do not protect me from things that are happening to you. That is not how this works. That has never been how this works." "I know," Emily said, and then for the first time in 5 years she added, "I'm sorry." Not the reflexive sorry she handed out in parking lots when strangers had to witness her struggling. The real one, the one that cost something. Sandra exhaled. "Who is this man? This Jack? I don't entirely know yet. But you trust him." Emily thought about this honestly. She thought about the bandana and the mug rinsed on the drying rack and 2 words said without ceremony or decoration, "You won't." She thought about a man who had separated anger from useful and sent a message to 100 brothers at midnight. "Yes," she said. "Strangely, yes." "Then I trust him too," Sandra said. "For now." A pause. "Call me tonight." "I will." "Call me if anything happens before tonight." "Mom." "Call me if anything happens. Say yes." "Yes." She hung up, and for a moment, she sat with the phone in both hands and felt something she had spent 5 years successfully avoiding, the specific relief of someone knowing the full truth of your situation. It did not fix anything. The crutches were still borrowed. Logan Pierce still existed. The 8 months of savings were still in pieces by her door. But the weight of the secret was gone, and she had not understood until this moment how much of her energy had been going toward carrying it. She got dressed, ate, and left for campus 45 minutes earlier than usual, which was saying something given that she already left earlier than anyone she knew. She was not prepared for what she found. The campus felt different when she arrived. Not visually, the buildings were the same. The walkways were the same. The particular quality of early morning university light that makes everything feel slightly preliminary and not yet fully committed to existing was the same. But the social atmosphere had shifted in the way that atmospheres shift when something has happened that everyone knows about, but no one has officially processed yet. People looked at her. Not the sideways pretend you're not looking she had grown accustomed to over 5 years of moving differently through shared spaces. Direct looking, the kind that meant they had seen something, a video, a post, a message thread, and they were now reconciling it with the person in front of them. She kept moving. The first person to actually speak to her was a girl from her structures class, Maya, who caught up with her near the engineering quad and fell into step beside her, adjusting her pace without fanfare, which Emily noticed and cataloged and said without preamble, "The video is everywhere." Emily's stomach dropped. "Which video?" "The one from yesterday. Someone posted it last night. Not one of Logan's friends, someone else, a bystander. It's got a lot of views." Emily processed this. "What kind of comments?" Maya was quiet for a beat. "Mostly people are angry at him, at the people who watched and didn't do anything." Another beat. "Some people are tagging the university." They reached the engineering building entrance. Emily stopped at the foot of the steps, the same pavement, where it had happened, and looked at them for a moment. She was aware of Maya watching her, giving her space to do whatever she needed to do with the geography of returning to a place where something had been taken from you. "I'm okay," Emily said. "I know you are," Maya said. "I didn't think you weren't." They went inside. Emily's first class was at 8. She made it through 20 minutes before her phone started buzzing with enough frequency that she finally turned it face down and left it that way until the class ended. During the break, she checked it and found 47 messages across 3 different platforms, most of them from people she hadn't spoken to in months or years or ever, the kind of digital outreach that floods in when a person becomes momentarily visible in a way they did not choose. She also found one message from Jack. It had been sent at 6:15 in the morning. "Don't leave campus today until you hear from me. Something is happening, and I need you to trust me on this." She stared at the message. She typed back, "How am I supposed to concentrate on thermodynamics right now?" His reply came in under a minute, "The same way you concentrated on everything else for 5 years. One equation at a time." She almost laughed. She did not laugh, but something in her chest loosened slightly enough to make the next 3 hours of class marginally survivable. At 11:15, she was between classes, crossing the open space between the engineering quad and the science building, the borrowed aluminum crutches doing their job without complaint when she heard the first one. A single engine. Distant at first, the sound carrying from somewhere beyond the campus perimeter, rolling low and steady in the way that single engines do. She registered it as background. She had grown up in a city. Motorcycles were not unusual sounds. She adjusted her bag and kept moving. Then there was a second engine, then a third. They were not in sequence, not a convoy sound, not the rhythmic overlap of vehicles moving together, but 3 separate engines converging from what sounded like 3 different directions, getting incrementally louder in a way that suggested they were not passing by. They were arriving. Emily slowed. Around her, other students slowed too. The particular human instinct to pause when something auditory is difficult to categorize when a sound is familiar in its components but unfamiliar in its scale, was operating across 20 or 30 people simultaneously. Everyone was doing the same mild recalibration. That's a motorcycle. That's another motorcycle. That's how many motorcycles? She stopped walking entirely. The sound built the way thunder builds when it's not moving away from you. Not a single rolling concussion, but a sustained layered accumulation engines, adding to engines the vibration finding its way through the concrete underfoot, up through the aluminum crutches into her palms. She stood absolutely still and felt it before she understood it. Then she turned toward the main campus entrance because that was where the sound was loudest and she saw them. They came through the gates without rushing. That was the thing she would remember first and longest, not the number. Though the number was impossible, the number was the kind of thing you had to count 3 times before you believed your own arithmetic. But the pace, they were not charging in. They were not announcing themselves with throttle or noise beyond what the engines naturally produced. They were simply arriving one by one and then in pairs and then in clusters, filling the main campus drive with the steady, purposeful movement of people who knew exactly where they were going and had decided that arriving was the complete statement. They wore black leather vests. Every one of them. The patches were visible from where Emily stood, which was 40 yards from the main entrance, which was where her legs had stopped cooperating with her brain's instruction to keep moving. She stood on the walkway between two buildings and watched the motorcycles come through the gates, and the rational part of her mind was trying to count, and the emotional part of her mind had stopped processing numbers entirely and was operating on a different frequency. A frequency that had to do with a message sent at midnight and 81 replies, and a man who had said you won't like it was a fact about physics. Students had stopped everywhere. She could feel it happening around her, the spreading stillness, the conversations cutting off the phones, coming up, because people needed a frame around what they were seeing before they could fully accept that they were seeing it. A professor had stepped outside a building door and was standing on the steps with a coffee mug in one hand, completely motionless. The motorcycles filled the main drive. Then they spread not chaotically, but with the organic intelligence of a group that had done things together for long enough to move as a body without needing explicit direction. They found spaces and filled them and shut off engines and got off bikes, and the cumulative silence, as the engines cut off one by one, was in its own way as loud as the arrival had been. Emily counted. She tried to count. She got to 60 and lost track and started over and got to 90 and lost track again because they were still arriving, still coming through the gate, still finding spots. She was still standing there immobile when she heard her name. Emily. Jack Walker was moving toward her from the direction of the main entrance. He was wearing the same vest. His face was the same weathered, unhurried, carrying the specific calm of a man who had done something he felt was correct and was not looking for confirmation that it was. Behind him at a distance that was respectful rather than crowding were two other men, both in vests, both with the particular physical vocabulary of people who had spent decades in environments that required situational awareness, who stopped when Jack stopped. He reached her and looked at her face and read it accurately. Too much, he said. How many, she said. It came out as a statement rather than a question because she was not sure her voice could manage inflection right now. 130, give or take. A few got stuck in traffic. He said it with the absolute even-handedness of a man reporting the weather. I told you something was happening. Jack, she stopped, started again. Jack, you can't just, she stopped again. I know it's a lot, he said. I want to tell you something and I need you to hear it fully before you react to the logistics. Can you do that? She looked at him, she nodded. Every man here came voluntarily. Nobody was pressured. I sent a message last night saying I needed people, and I told them why, and they showed up because they decided to show up. Mechanics, veterans, teachers, a pediatric nurse from across the city who has 3 kids at home and still rode 40 minutes this morning. Because he said, and I am quoting him directly, somebody has to. These are not scary men doing a scary thing. These are people who decided that a young woman they have never met deserved to know that what happened to her was not acceptable, and they wanted to be standing somewhere visible when that was said. Emily's jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing something she was working hard to control. They're not here to threaten anyone, Jack continued. They're not here to escalate. If the university asks us to leave, we leave. We're not here to make your situation harder. We're here because he stopped. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed to be working to find words, the practiced ease of his conversation giving way to something more effortful. We're here because yesterday 30 people watched and not one of them moved. And someone had to come back and fix that picture. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked behind him at 130 men standing quietly on a university campus in black leather vests. Not performing, not posturing, simply present, simply there, the way Jack Walker had been, simply there when he knelt in the mud next to her, and something inside her chest that had been braced for 5 years, braced against the specific pain of needing people in a world that kept demonstrating it had not allotted enough of them released. Not dramatically, not with a sound or a collapse or any of the visible indicators of emotional surrender. Just a slow, quiet release like a door opening on its own weight. Okay, she said. Okay. Jack studied her face. Don't make me say more than that right now, she said. I'm working on it. He nodded. He turned and looked back at his brothers and made a single small gesture, the kind of gesture that means she's all right in any language. And she watched something pass through the group, not a cheer, nothing so theatrical, but a visible settling, a collective release of readiness into presence, the shift from a group waiting to a group that has arrived. That was when Logan Pierce walked through. He was crossing the campus from the direction of the athletic center, which meant he had come from the east entrance, which meant he had not seen the motorcycles arrive, which became apparent when he walked around the corner of the student union building and stopped so abruptly that the two friends behind him bumped into him from behind. He stood there with his athletic bag on one shoulder and his phone in his hand and looked at 130 members of the Hells Angels standing quietly on his campus. The color went out of his face, not gradually. At once, someone near Emily said very quietly, "Oh." Logan's first instinct, she could see it move through him, could see the calculation was performance. The same reflex that had powered every interaction they'd had for 5 months. If you perform confidence loudly enough, it becomes real. He straightened his shoulders. He looked around at the audience of students who had been gathering around the edges of the situation for the last 15 minutes. Students who were filming, students who were texting, students who were doing the social media version of what the students in the parking lot yesterday had done, witnessing from a distance. And he found that audience and he said at a volume designed to carry, "Is this supposed to intimidate me? Because this is actually illegal. You're trespassing on a university campus and I'm about to call campus security." Silence. Not the guilty, complicit silence of the parking lot yesterday. A different silence. The silence of a very large number of people who were listening with complete attention. Jack Walker walked forward 6 steps. Not rapidly, not with aggression. He covered the distance between himself and Logan with the same hurried economy of movement he applied to everything stopped at a conversational distance and looked at Logan Pierce with an expression that contained to Emily's eye no anger at all. That was the most unsettling thing about it. Logan had prepared himself for anger. He had braced for it, was already organizing his response to it, and the thing looking back at him from Jack Walker's face was not anger, it was patience. The deep, settled, unassailable patience of someone who has made peace with who they are and what they're doing and does not require the other person's cooperation to maintain it. "You're right that this is a university campus," Jack said. "We're happy to speak with security. We're happy to speak with the administration. We're not hiding from anyone." A pause. "We came to make sure that what happened yesterday gets seen the way it should be seen. That's it. What happened yesterday was a private situation. There were 50 witnesses," Jack said, "and at least 3 recordings." He let that land. "One of those recordings was posted last night. You may have already seen the response to it. If you haven't, I'd recommend taking a few minutes before this conversation goes any further." Logan's jaw worked. He was recalibrating in real time, which meant his answer was slower than his instincts usually were, and the slowness revealed something. It revealed that he knew. He had seen the post, he had seen the comments, he had spent at least part of the morning watching the thing he thought was private become something with a view count, and whatever calculations he had been running since yesterday were now producing different numbers. "I'm going to call my father," Logan said. "That's your right," Jack said. "He's a lawyer." "I figured," Jack said, not dismissively, simply. "The way you acknowledge information you had already accounted for." Logan looked at his friends. Neither of them offered him anything useful. He looked at the crowd of students around the edges of the situation, the phones, the watching faces, the specific quality of attention that indicated they were not on his side of this, were not performing solidarity with him the way they had yesterday when silence was easy, and he did something Emily did not expect. He looked at her, not at Jack, not at the 130 men, at Emily. She met his eyes. She did not look away. For 5 months, she had looked away from Logan Pierce because looking directly at something that was hurting you required believing you deserved to look at it directly, and she had not been sure she believed that. She looked at him now and did not move and did not flinch and did not arrange her face into anything conciliatory or small. She watched him look at her, and she watched for the first time in 5 months the recognition move through his face. Not remorse, she was not naive enough to expect remorse on command, but recognition. The specific, unavoidable recognition of a person confronted with the full reality of another person's humanity at a moment when that humanity is impossible to reduce or dismiss. He looked away first. He took his phone out and called someone turning his back to the crowd, and Emily knew from the way his shoulders changed that the call connected and the person on the other end was his father, And whatever Logan Pierce said to his father in the next 45 seconds, the world was about to become significantly more complicated for everyone involved. She was prepared for complicated. She had been managing complicated for 5 years on her own. The difference now was the 130 men standing behind her, and the man with gray hair and a weathered face who had driven back to her left side and was standing there with the complete stillness of someone who intends to stay as long as they are needed, and the text message from her mother that had come in at 11:47 that morning, while Emily was watching Logan's face rearrange itself around the truth, a text that said only, "I'm here. Whatever you need." The university's head of campus security arrived at 11:58. He was a man in his late 50s named Delgado who had been doing this job for 22 years and who looked when he came around the corner and took in the full scope of what was happening like a man who was recalculating his retirement timeline. He walked directly to Jack. "Sir, I'm going to need to understand what's happening here." "Of course," Jack said. He extended his hand. Delgado, after a visible beat of adjustment, shook it. "My name is Jack Walker. I represent a group of concerned private citizens who are here in a supportive capacity. We're on public access portions of the campus. We have no intention of causing any disruption. We'd like to make sure that what happened to this young woman yesterday," he indicated Emily with a straightforward gesture, not presenting her, "just acknowledging her is handled through whatever official process the university has, and we want her to know she has people standing beside her while that process happens." Delgado looked at Emily. "Are you Emily Carter?" "Yes, sir." "Are you here voluntarily? Is there anything happening here that you want stopped?" "No," she said. "Nothing I want stopped." Delgado looked back at Jack, then at the 130. He was quiet for a moment. "You understand I need to notify administration." "We expected that," Jack said. "We'll cooperate fully with whatever comes from that." Delgado nodded slowly. He looked around at the gathered students, at the phones, at the visible evidence that this moment was already being documented from 40 different angles and would exist in permanent, searchable form within the hour. He made the calculation that Emily could see him making. "I'm going to ask you to keep the group in this area," he said. "Don't approach any buildings, don't block any paths." "Understood," Jack said. Delgado pulled out his radio and walked 20 feet away to make his calls. Emily exhaled. "You've done this before," she said to Jack. "Not an accusation, an observation. Shown up somewhere. Yeah, the specifics vary. Do people always shake your hand?" "No," he said. "Sometimes they yell first. Delgado's efficient. I respect that." He glanced sideways at her. "How are you doing?" "Genuinely, I don't know yet." She looked out at the gathered crowd, her fellow students, her university, the geography of the last 2 years of her life, and then at the 130 men who had ridden here this morning for someone they had never met. "I keep trying to find the part where this becomes something I know how to process. I'm not there yet." "That's okay," Jack said. "You don't have to process it while it's happening." "Jack," she paused. "What if the university sides with Logan's father? What if the money and the lawyers and the—" "Then we find another avenue," he said. "Simply, this isn't the only place accountability can happen. The video already exists. The story already exists. Accountability doesn't only live in official buildings." He looked at her. "But let's see what the university does before we assume the worst of them." She nodded. A young man she didn't recognize, early 30s, heavy set with a red bandana folded in his back pocket and a Hells Angels patch from a Chapter 3, states away, walked up to her left side and stopped at a respectful distance. He looked at her crutches, then at her face. "I drove 6 hours last night," he said. "I want you to know that, not to make you feel a certain way about it. Just so you know, it was a considered decision, not an impulse." His voice was lower than she expected, careful with itself. "My daughter has spina bifida. She's 9. And when Jack sent that message and said what happened, He stopped, started again. "I needed her to live in a world where somebody shows up. Even once, I needed that to be a thing that happens." Emily looked at him. She did not have words for this. She had been trained by 5 years of solitude to have words for everything, to meet every interaction with some functional version of articulate response. And this man standing in front of her, talking about his 9-year-old daughter in a 6-hour drive, had taken every word she owned and put them somewhere she couldn't access. She held out her hand. He shook it, carefully. "The way you handle something that matters. Behind him, someone started a slow rhythmic sound. Not voices, not music, the sound of 129 people placing their hands against the sides of their motorcycles and producing a single low unified percussion, steady and deep and not quite like anything else in the world. Emily stood in the middle of a university campus on a Friday morning in March with borrowed aluminum crutches and a bleeding palm and her 8 months of savings in pieces at home, and she listened to the sound, and she did not cry, but only because she had made a decision about that and she intended to keep it. She looked at Jack. "Tell me what happens next," she said. And Jack Walker, who had spent 30 years learning the difference between anger and useful, and choosing useful every time, looked at her with the uncomplicated steadiness of someone who has already worked out the answer to the question you just asked. "Next," he said, "is where it gets interesting." The university's dean of students was a woman named Patricia Holloway, and she had been doing her job for 19 years, which meant she had seen most categories of campus crisis at least twice, and had developed over those 19 years a professional composure that her staff privately referred to as the wall. Not unkindly, the wall was what made her good at her job. It was the ability to walk into a room containing competing versions of a situation and not visibly align with any of them until she had heard everything there was to hear. The wall cracked slightly when she came around the corner of the administration building at 1217 and saw for the first time with her own eyes, rather than through Delgado's increasingly agitated radio reports, 130 members of the Hells Angels standing quietly on her campus. She stopped walking for exactly 2 seconds. Then she kept moving because Patricia Holloway had not built the wall by allowing 2-second pauses to become longer ones. She went directly to Delgado, who gave her a rapid summary. She looked at Jack. She looked at Emily. She looked at the crowd of students that had been building for the last hour, and at the phones, and at the presence of 2 local news vehicles that had appeared at the campus perimeter in the last 20 minutes because someone had posted something and someone else had shared it, and the story had been moving through the city's media awareness. The way these things move now, quickly, without gates, without anyone's permission. She walked to Emily first. That was the thing Emily noticed. Not to Jack, not to Delgado, not to the crowd, to Emily. Patricia Holloway, who was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain and a blazer that had seen a full working week, and it was only Friday, walked directly to Emily Carter and extended her hand and said, "I'm Dean Holloway. I want to hear from you directly. Not from the report I was given, not from the security summary, from you." Emily looked at the hand, then at the woman. "Okay," she said. "Not here," the dean said. She looked at Jack. "I'd like to speak with Miss Carter in my office. She can have support present if she chooses." "She chooses," Jack said. They moved inside. The dean's office was on the 3rd floor of the administration building and had the specific quality of a room that had absorbed decades of difficult conversations, not oppressive, but weighted the way old wood gets weighted with use. Patricia Holloway sat behind her desk and folded her hands and looked at Emily Carter, who sat across from her in a chair with Jack Walker to her right, and a borrowed pair of aluminum crutches propped against the armrest, and the dean said, "Tell me everything. And please, this do not edit it for my benefit." Emily almost told her she was fine. The reflex was that deep-seated, that automatic. She caught it. She took a breath. And she told the dean everything she had told Jack the night before, but this time in a different key, not the exhausted, rain-soaked relief of someone who had just survived something, but the clear, deliberate testimony of someone who had decided that the truth was going to be fully spoken in this room regardless of what it cost her. She talked for 18 minutes without interruption. Patricia Holloway did not write anything down. She listened with a complete focused attention of someone who had learned that the first version of a story told directly by the person who lived it was the most important document in any investigation, and that taking notes while it was being delivered meant you were only half there. When Emily finished, the dean was quiet for a moment. 5 months, she said. "Yes. You didn't report it because you were afraid of what the process would do." "I was afraid of not being believed," Emily said. "I was afraid of being the problem instead of the solution. I was afraid that if I reported it and nothing happened, I would have given them proof that nothing was going to happen, and I wasn't sure I could carry that." She paused. "I was also afraid that if something did happen, it would escalate things. He has money. His father has influence. Those aren't irrational fears. No, Patricia Holloway said with the precision of someone carefully separating what they want to say from what the moment requires. They're not irrational. She looked at the desk for a moment, then back up. Miss Carter, I want to be honest with you about something, and I want you to understand that what I'm about to say is not an excuse. It is an explanation of a failure, not a justification of one. Emily waited. We have systems for this. We have reporting mechanisms and confidential advisors in a disability services department that is supposed to function as a safety net for exactly this kind of situation. Those systems failed you, either because you didn't feel you could access them, which is a failure of our communication, or because they were not visible enough to reach you, which is a failure of our design. Either way, that failure belongs to this institution, and I am not going to sit across from you and pretend otherwise. The room was quiet. Jack said nothing. Emily had the sense he was waiting to see if she needed him to say something, and that if she did, he would, and that if she didn't, he wouldn't. That calibration, the precise, respectful calibration of support that does not crowd the person being supported, was something she had begun to understand was not accidental. It was a practice, one he had been developing for a long time. What happens now? Emily said. Formally, I open an investigation today. Today, not Monday, not next week. This afternoon. The dean's voice was careful and direct. Logan Pierce and his two friends will be notified that a formal conduct review has been initiated. They will be placed on interim suspension from athletic participation pending the outcome. I cannot tell you what the final determination will be because I don't control that the conduct board does, but I can tell you what I will be recommending. What's that? Full suspension, mandatory disability awareness programming, community service hours in a disability services context, meaning time spent with people in the community who use mobility equipment, who depend on adaptive technology, who live the life you've been living, and that Logan Pierce decided was entertainment. She held Emily's gaze. And I will be recommending that the athletic department conduct its own internal review of the environment that allowed this behavior to continue unchallenged for 5 months in a place where a number of people should have seen it. Something moved through Emily's chest. Not victory. She had been clear with herself that she did not want victory because victory was about her and what she wanted was bigger than her, but something adjacent to it, something that felt like the moment a pressure differential equalizes. I don't want him destroyed, Emily said. The dean looked at her with the specific kind of attention you pay when someone surprises you. I want him to understand it, Emily continued. That's actually what I want. I want there to be a version of Logan Pierce that comes out of this having genuinely understood what it means to be the person he decided I was. Not because I'm forgiving him, I'm not there yet, and I may not get there, and that's allowed, but because the version of him that understands it is less likely to do it to the next person. Patricia Holloway was quiet for a long moment. In 19 years, she said, I have heard a great many things in this office from a great many students. I want you to know that what you just said is not something I hear often. I'm not saying it to be impressive, Emily said. I know, the dean said. That's why it is. The meeting lasted 40 minutes total. By the time Emily and Jack came back down the stairs and out the main entrance of the administration building, the situation outside had shifted in the specific way that situations shift when official machinery has been visibly set in motion. The energy was different. The news cameras at the perimeter were more active. The crowd of students had partially dispersed and partially intensified, fewer idle observers. More people who seemed to have a reason to be there, including Emily, noticed a cluster of students near the east walkway holding handmade signs. She was too far away to read clearly. She also noticed immediately and viscerally that Logan Pierce was no longer visible anywhere in the area. Jack noticed her noticing. He went inside about 20 minutes ago. His father arrived. Emily absorbed this. What does that mean for the process? Depends on the father, Jack said. Some lawyers see a situation like this and they tell their client to get ahead of it. Others go the other direction. Which way do you think Richard Pierce goes? Jack looked at her. How do you know his first name? Logan mentioned it during the call he made. I was close enough to hear him say it. She paused. He said, Dad, there are a lot of them and the cameras are already here. Those were his exact words. Jack was quiet for a beat. That's useful information, he said. The cameras changed the math for a lawyer like his father. A private settlement is one thing. A public record is another. He'll try to make it go away quietly. He'll try, Jack agreed. Can he? Not anymore, Jack said. And for the first time since she had met him, there was something in his voice that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same neighborhood, the specific feeling of a person who has positioned things correctly and is watching the positioning hold. The video has 40,000 views. It had 600 when I checked this morning. That math is not reversible. Emily stood with this for a moment. Then one of the men who had come with Jack, an older man barrel-chested with a white beard that had been there long enough to become part of Oz's face, introduced himself to Emily 2 hours ago as Garrett Chapter Vice President, formerly a high school history teacher for 27 years, walked up and said without ceremony, "Dean wants to speak with you, Jack, outside through the side entrance. She's bringing legal counsel." Jack looked at Emily. "You okay for 10 minutes?" "I'm okay," she said. And for the first time in recent memory, the statement was not a lie, not an edited version, not a strategic deployment of a phrase she used to make other people comfortable. She was in the specific and literal sense, okay. Jack went with Garrett. Emily stood alone. Not alone exactly, because there were 128 other people in the general vicinity, plus the students who remained, plus the cameras. But in the personal sense, she was standing by herself. And that felt for the first time like a position she had chosen rather than a state that had been imposed on her. Maya appeared at her elbow. She had been somewhere in the crowd for the last 2 hours, had texted twice with updates that Emily had read, but not had the capacity to respond to. And now she was simply present, standing at a comfortable distance with a coffee in each hand. She held one out to Emily. "It's from the cart. I remember you get it black." Emily took it. "How are you actually doing?" Maya said. Not a question exactly. More of a door left open. "I told the dean everything," Emily said, "and she's opening the investigation today." "I know. Someone on the conduct board staff leaked it already. It's on 3 different group chats." Emily let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "This campus cannot keep a secret." "No," Maya agreed, which is usually annoying, but right now is probably useful. She drank her coffee, looked out at the crowd. "Emily, I have to tell you something, and I want you to know I'm telling you because I should have told you 4 months ago, and I'm sorry I didn't." Emily turned to look at her. "I saw one of the videos, the second one in November." Maya held her gaze steadily with the particular courage of someone who has decided to be honest about something uncomfortable and is not going to look for an exit in the middle of it. "I didn't share it, but I also didn't say anything, to you or to anyone. I told myself it wasn't my business, that you hadn't asked me to do anything, that getting involved would maybe make things worse for you. And some of that might have been partially true, but mostly I just didn't want the inconvenience of it." Emily was quiet. "And you sat in the mud yesterday," Maya said, "while I was in a building 40 yards away and nobody moved." She shook her head. "I'm not making myself the center of your story. I just needed you to know that I know I could have done something, and I didn't, and I'm sorry." Emily looked at her for a moment. She thought about 30 people in a parking lot. She thought about the way silence accumulates, not one person's choice, but many people's choices. Each one small enough to feel like not a choice at all, and then the accumulated weight of all of them landing on one person in the mud. "Okay," Emily said, "okay. I hear you." Emily paused. "I'm not going to tell you it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I believe you that it won't happen again, and that counts for something." Maya nodded. She looked like she had more to say and was making the correct decision not to say it. They stood together and drank their coffee. Inside the administration building, something was happening that neither of them could see. Richard Pierce was 54 years old, a partner at a firm that specialized in institutional defense, and he had spent his career being the person in the room who controlled the temperature. He was good at it. He was, by professional reputation, excellent at it, the man you called when a situation had heat and you needed it cooled, contained, shaped into something manageable. He had walked into Patricia Holloway's conference room with his briefcase and his reading glasses. In his 30 years of doing exactly this, and he had spent the first 10 minutes of the meeting doing what he always did, establishing the parameters of what his client would and would not acknowledge, framing the incident in language that redistributed culpability, and implicitly communicating to everyone in the room that there was an easier version of this available to all parties if they were willing to be practical. What he had not accounted for was Patricia Holloway, And what Patricia Holloway had that Richard Pierce had not expected her to have was a copy of a recording. Not the one posted online, a second one. A student named Kevin Marsh, who lived in the same dormitory as two of Logan's teammates and had been hearing about the Crutch Girl videos since October, had attended a team party in February where Logan had shown a private compilation on his phone to a group of about 15 people. Kevin Marsh had recorded 38 seconds of that screening on his own phone. He had held on to it for 6 weeks, uncertain what to do with it. And then last night, after seeing the parking lot video posted online, after watching the comment count climb through the night, he had walked into the campus security office at 8 in the morning and handed his phone to the officer on duty and said, "I should have done this months ago." The 38 seconds showed Logan Pierce narrating his own compilation of videos nobody had known existed beyond the ones posted publicly, with a commentary that removed any possible interpretation of accident, of thoughtlessness, of context that might soften the picture. It showed a young man who had been doing this intentionally, systematically over months, and who had found it funny. Richard Pierce watched the 38 seconds with the expression of a man watching his entire prepared argument become irrelevant in real time. When it was done, Patricia Holloway said, "I want to be clear that this institution's position is not one of seeking punishment beyond what is warranted. But I want to be equally clear that what is warranted is now substantially established by evidence your client recorded himself." Richard Pierce said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "I need time with my son." "You have until Monday morning," the dean said, "at which point the conduct board convenes with or without your client's cooperation." Richard Pierce packed his briefcase. He looked at Jack Walker, who was sitting 2 seats down from the dean with his hands folded on the table. The two men looked at each other, different worlds, different vocabularies, similar ages, the specific mutual recognition of men who have each spent their lives being the person who decides things. "Your people are going to leave now," Richard Pierce said. "Our people are going to leave when Ms. Carter has no further need of visible support," Jack said, "which may be today, maybe Monday, maybe whenever the conduct board issues its findings. We're patient men." Richard Pierce nodded once and walked out. Jack looked at the dean. "That's going the right direction." "It is," she said. "There's something else I'd like to discuss with you. Not about the conduct process, about something I think could come out of this if we're thoughtful about it." Jack waited. "Ms. Carter told me about her project," Patricia Holloway said. "What she's building, what she intends to build." She looked at the table for a moment. "This institution has a technology incubator fund. It is consistently underpromoted and underutilized. I have been looking for a project that would give it real visibility and real purpose." She looked at Jack. "I'm not making any promises because I do not make promises I can't keep. But I would like to have a formal conversation with her next week about whether there is an application worth submitting." Jack looked at the dean for a moment. "You're telling me this now instead of telling her." "I'm telling you now because you are clearly the person she trusts at this particular moment, and I want that trust extended to this institution, and I am asking you to help me build a bridge that I am aware we have not fully earned yet." Jack was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, "I'll tell her. She makes her own decisions." "Of course she does," the dean said. Outside, Emily was on the phone with her mother. Sandra had been calling every 40 minutes with the faithfulness of a person who has agreed not to drive to campus and is honoring that agreement through sheer concentrated willpower. Emily had been answering with updates that were honest, which was new, which still felt strange in her mouth the way an unfamiliar food feels strange. Not bad, just different. The adjustment period of truth after a long diet of management. "They have a second video," Emily told her. "One from a party in February. Logan narrated it himself." Sandra's silence was a specific kind of silent. "Mom, I'm here. I'm just—" A sharp breath. 5 months, Emily." "I know." "Your father would have—" Sandra stopped. "I know, Mom. He would have driven there the first week." Emily smiled. It came out of nowhere, the smile, a real one, the involuntary kind that arrives before you've approved it. "He would have driven there the first day," she said. "He would have shown up in the parking lot with his truck and his 3-finger drum solo, and he would have said something that made Logan Pierce feel like an idiot without ever raising his voice." Sandra made a sound that was both crying and laughing, which was a sound Emily had not heard from her mother since the funeral, since the specific grief of a woman who has had to find a way to hold both things at once. "Tell me about this, Jack," Sandra said once the sound had settled. He's Emily thought about how to describe Jack Walker to her mother. She thought about the bandana and the mug and the midnight message and 130 men on a Friday morning. She thought about "you won't" in one equation at a time, and the way he had said Maria's name, not with grief exactly, but with the care of someone who keeps something precious in a place where it doesn't get worn down by the world. He lost his sister, Emily said, and she had a disability. They never had enough money for the right equipment. She paused. He saw me in the parking lot and he stopped. And then he called everyone he knew. Sandra was quiet. He reminds me of Dad, Emily said, in the specific way of a person who doesn't talk a lot about being decent, but is just consistently, relentlessly decent in every small thing they do. I want to meet him, Sandra said. Yeah, Emily said. I think you should. At 2:45 in the afternoon, the word came through from the athletic department. Logan Pierce and his two friends had been formally suspended from all athletic activities pending the conduct review. The department's statement, released through official channels and posted on the university's website within the hour, included language that the Disability Advocacy Office's director, who had been watching the situation develop since morning, later described as remarkably direct for a first-day institutional response. At 3:10, a second thing happened. One of the local news stations posted a short segment online, pulling from the footage taken outside the administration building. The segment included a 15-second clip of Jack Walker speaking to the reporter, 3 sentences unhurried, clear, with the specific authority of a man who had nothing to prove and was simply saying what was true. We are here because a young woman needed people to stand beside her, and we were people who could stand. That's the beginning and the end of the explanation. There is no more complicated version than that. The clip was shared 9,000 times in the first hour. At 4 o'clock, Emily was sitting on a bench outside the engineering building. The same building, the same general geography as yesterday. The choice of location deliberate in a way she had acknowledged to herself without making a production of it, when Garrett, the former history teacher with the white beard, sat down beside her. He had a folded piece of paper in his hand. What's that? Emily said. 11 names, Garrett said. Men from our chapter and 2 neighboring ones. Retired and current engineers, fabricators, a materials scientist, and 1 gentleman who spent 30 years in medical device manufacturing and still consults. He held it out. Jack said you had a project. He didn't give details. He said the details were yours to give, but he asked me to find out whether we had people who might be useful. Emily took the paper. She looked at the 11 names. She thought about the Carter Project, the things she had kept in a private folder on her laptop and in a private section of her brain for 2 years. The things she had not told professors or advisors or anyone who might want to have opinions about it. The things she had worked on in the margins of everything else, because the margins were all she had and she had decided they were enough. 11 names. An engineering professor who had called her work unexpectedly elegant. A dean who had mentioned an incubator fund. A man who had his sister's name available whenever Emily decided she needed it. She folded the paper. She put it in her jacket pocket, in the same pocket where she had put Jack's note from this morning, the one about Bobby's crutches being aluminum but well-balanced. The pockets were getting full. She was aware of this in the symbolic way as well as the literal. Tell him thank you, she said. Tell him yourself, Garrett said. He's right behind you. She turned. Jack Walker was walking toward her from the direction of the administration building with the unhurried steadiness she had come to recognize in less than 24 hours, as simply the way he moved through the world, not performing calm, not manufacturing patience, genuinely possessed of both in a way that was less a personality trait and more an earned condition. He sat down on her other side. Dean wants to talk to you next week, he said, about the incubator fund. It's for student projects. She thinks yours qualifies. She wanted me to tell you before she makes it official so you could decide how you feel about it before she puts the weight of a formal invitation behind it. Emily looked ahead. She stopped. Yeah, Jack said. I don't know how to do this, she said. This is people helping me. This is not. She stopped again. I don't know how to let people help me. I have been specifically and deliberately not knowing how to do that for 5 years, and now in 24 hours I know, Jack said. It's a lot. It is, he agreed. How do you do it? She said. Accept it. Let people in. Not feel like you owe everyone something impossible. He thought about this. Not performing the thinking, actually doing it. Taking the questions seriously in the way that questions deserve when they are genuinely meant. You stop thinking about it as a transaction, he said. Nobody who showed up today is keeping a ledger. They came because as it was the right place to be. You receive it the same way, not as a debt, not as a balance that needs settling, but as a thing that happened and meant something. He paused. The owing part is not to the people who helped you, it's to the next person in the mud. Emily was quiet. The late afternoon was settling around the campus. Most of the motorcycles were gone now. They had left in stages throughout the afternoon. The way they had arrived without ceremony, without requiring acknowledgement, which was the thing she thought she would carry longest about this day. They had come and they had stood and they had left, and none of it had been about being seen doing it. It had simply been about doing it. 20 bikes remain, Jack's and a handful of others. The conduct board meets Monday, Emily said. I'll be here Monday, Jack said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why I'm going to. Emily looked at the borrowed aluminum crutches propped against the bench beside her. She thought about Monday. She thought about the conduct board and Logan Pierce and Richard Pierce and all the machinery of accountability that was now in motion. And she thought about the incubator fund and 11 names in her jacket pocket and a dean who had said her work qualified. She thought about her father, about what Sandra had said he would have driven there the first day. She thought about this day and what it had cost her to get here. Not just the 5 months of Logan, not just the 8 months of savings, not just the 5 years of rebuilding herself into someone who didn't need anyone, but the original cost. The Tuesday morning in October, the pretzels and the argument about music and the truck from the side street. All of it had been moving towards something. She did not know exactly what yet, but she knew that the girl who had sat in the mud yesterday surrounded by 50 witnesses and not a single person willing to close the distance was not the same girl sitting on this bench right now. The distance had been closed by a man who had decided to stop, by 130 people who had decided it was the right place to be, by a mother who had picked up on the second ring, by a study partner who had looked her in the eye and said, I know I could have done something and I didn't, and I'm sorry. By a former history teacher who had handed her 11 names on a folded piece of paper without asking what she planned to do with them. By all the small, unceremonious, completely ordinary acts of people deciding that someone else's situation was their business after all. Emily reached into her pocket and ran her thumb across the folded paper. 11 names, the beginning of something she did not have a complete shape for yet. The Carter Project, which was about to need a better name and a real structure and people who understood materials and manufacturing and the specific engineering of making something right for the bodies that needed it rather than cheap enough for the system that funded it. She was going to need help. She was going to have to learn how to receive it. She took a breath. Jack, she said. Yeah. The night of the accident, she said slowly. When I was in the rehabilitation center after the surgeries, after they told me about the nerve damage, there was one night where I thought I couldn't do it, where I genuinely thought I had reached the actual limit of what I was able to carry. He was listening. A nurse sat with me for 4 hours, Emily said. She didn't say anything that fixed it. She didn't have answers. She just stayed until I fell asleep. And in the morning, things weren't better exactly, but I could see a way forward that I hadn't been able to see the night before. She paused. I never found out her name. You couldn't ask. She was gone by morning, different shift. I was only there 3 more days and I asked, and nobody could tell me which nurse it had been. Jack nodded slowly. I thought about her a lot over the years, Emily said, wondering if she knew, whether she understood what those 4 hours meant. She looked at him. Do you think people know when they do something that matters to someone? Do they know? Jack considered this. He thought about the person who had stopped for him once in his own version of the mud. He thought about whether that person had known, whether the knowledge of it had reached them through whatever channel it traveled. I don't think it matters, he said, whether they know. What matters is that it happened. The knowing is for us. The doing is for them. Emily sat with this. Okay, she said. She said it the same way she had said it to him that morning in the parking lot, not as agreement, not as surrender, but as a door opening on something she was willing to walk through. She picked up her borrowed crutches. She stood. She stood up on a Friday afternoon with borrowed crutches and 11 names in her pocket, and the world did not immediately transform into something easier. That was the thing nobody told you about the moments after someone shows up for you. Life does not suddenly become simple. The machinery keeps running. Monday still comes. Monday came. Emily was at the administration building at 8:45, 15 minutes before the conduct board was scheduled to convene, wearing her cleanest jacket and the aluminum crutches that she had quietly begun to think of as Bobby's, in the specific way you name things that carry you through hard periods. Jack was beside her. Garrett was there. Maya was there, which Emily had not expected and which moved something in her chest when she saw her standing outside the building with 2 coffees and the expression of a person who has made a decision about the kind of person they intend to be going forward. Sandra Carter was also there. She had driven 3 hours the night before and slept on Emily's couch without being asked, without announcing she was coming, until she was already an hour into the drive, at which point she had called and said simply, "I'm coming. Don't tell me not to." Emily had not told her not to. She had put sheets on the couch and made dinner for 2 and sat with her mother at the kitchen table for the first time in months. The real kind of sitting. Not the managed phone calls, not the edited updates, just 2 people who loved each other in a kitchen, eating and talking and not pretending that the table was the same size it used to be with 3 people at it. Sandra had looked at the broken carbon fiber crutches still propped by the door and said nothing for a long time. Then she had reached across the table and put her hand over Emily's, and they had sat like that without either of them needing to convert it into words. When Emily introduced her to Jack in the administration building lobby Monday morning, Sandra Carter looked at him for a long moment, the specific assessment of a woman who has been the sole protector of her daughter for 5 years and takes that responsibility with complete seriousness. Then she extended her hand and said, "She told me you remind her of her father. I want you to know that is not a small thing." Jack shook her hand. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," Sandra said. "And you stopped." Jack looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you," Sandra said. 2 words, clean and total. The conduct board meeting lasted 4 hours. Emily was not in the room for all of it. She gave her testimony. In the first 90 minutes, answered questions from the board members with the clarity of someone who had been telling this story in pieces for days and had finally assembled it into a single coherent shape, and then waited outside in the hallway with her mother and Jack and Maya while the board heard from Logan and his friends and the university's disability services director, and finally from Kevin Marsh, who walked past Emily in the hallway on his way in and stopped and said, "I'm Kevin. I'm the one who had the video from the party." Emily looked at him. He was 20 years old maybe, with the expression of someone who had not slept well in several days and was making peace with why. "I know," she said. "I should have come forward sooner." "Yes," she said, not cruelly, just honestly. He nodded. "I'm sorry." "I know," she said again. "Go tell them what you saw." He went in. The board's preliminary findings came down at 3 in the afternoon. Logan Pierce was suspended for 2 full semesters. His 2 friends received 1 semester each. All 3 were removed from athletic participation permanently, which was the outcome that the athletic director, a man who had spent the morning in a separate meeting that nobody had officially announced, but that everyone in the administration building knew was happening, had confirmed in writing before noon. The formal written ruling would take an additional week, but the preliminary findings were clear. Richard Pierce, who had been in the building for the first 2 hours and had left before the findings were announced, had issued no public statement. His firm's website went temporarily offline sometime around 2 in the afternoon, which was the kind of thing that the internet noticed and documented and turned into a data point in the larger story that was still unfolding across social media in a way that nobody was controlling and nobody could. Emily heard the preliminary findings from Dean Holloway, who came into the hallway and delivered them with the directness and lack of theatrical ceremony that Emily had come to appreciate as simply the way this woman operated. "It's not everything," the dean said. "I want to be honest with you. There will be appeals. The process has additional steps. This is not the final word." "I know," Emily said, "but it is a clear first word." "Yes." Emily looked at the hallway floor for a moment, then back up. "Thank you for how you handled this." "I handled it the way I should have," Patricia Holloway said. "I want to be clear, that's not the same as handling it well in a larger sense. In a larger sense, this institution did not handle it well for 5 months before Friday. That accountability is not finished." Emily nodded. The dean looked at her. Wednesday, if you're willing, 2 o'clock, my office. We talk about the incubator fund. I'll be there, Emily said. Jack, who had been standing 6 feet down the hallway with the patience of a man who had been in waiting rooms in various forms for decades, looked at Emily when the dean walked away. Will T size? 2 semesters, she said. He nodded. It's not nothing, she said. No, he agreed. It's not nothing. Sandra appeared from the direction of the water fountain, looked at their faces and read the situation with the accuracy of a mother who has been reading her child's face for 22 years. She crossed the hallway and put both arms around Emily, which Emily accepted not stiffly, not with the managed politeness she usually applied to physical expressions of comfort, but fully, the way you accept warmth when you have been cold for a long time and have finally decided that being warm is allowed. They stayed like that for a while. Maya, who was leaning against the wall 6 feet away, looked at Jack. Jack looked at the ceiling. Both of them understood that this particular moment was not theirs and gave it the space it needed. Wednesday came. Emily went to the meeting with the incubator fund. She brought her laptop. She brought the project folder she had been maintaining for 2 years, the one labeled the Carter Project that she had never shown anyone. And she sat across from Patricia Holloway and the fund's coordinator, a lean, precise woman named Dr. Ewan, who had the specific energy of someone who evaluated ideas for a living and found most of them only partially formed. And Emily opened her laptop and said, I've been working on this for 2 years. I know it's not complete. I know there are gaps. I'm not presenting it as finished. I'm presenting it as real. She talked for 40 minutes. Design concepts for pediatric forearm crutches using composite materials that reduced weight by 60% over standard aluminum at a manufacturing cost she had researched and documented and benchmarked against existing commercial products. Ergonomic adjustability built into the design rather than added as an afterthought. A modular system that could be configured for different mobility needs without requiring a separate product for each configuration. And a distribution model, this was the part she had spent the most time on, had filled the most notebooks with, had argued with herself about the most designed to reach families at income levels that the current market had decided were not worth serving. Dr. Ewan asked 12 questions. They were good questions, the kind that exposed the weak points in an argument without hostility, that treated the person across the table as someone capable of handling direct engagement with the limitations of their own work. Emily answered 9 of them fully and said, I don't have that answer yet, to the remaining 3, which was apparently the correct response given the way Dr. Ewan's expression shifted. The I don't know yet answers are more useful to me than overconfident answers to things you haven't fully solved, Dr. Ewan said. It tells me you know where your edges are. Emily applied for the incubator fund on Thursday. The application took her 11 hours. She sent it at 2 in the morning and then sat at her desk for a while looking at the sent confirmation on her screen and thought about the night she had ordered her carbon fiber crutches and stayed up until 2, adjusting the fit, and called her mother. This felt the same, different in every particular, identical in its quality. She called her mother. Sandra picked up on the second ring. She always would. Tell me, she said. I submitted it, Emily said. How does it feel? Emily thought about this. Like standing up when you're not sure the ground is going to hold, and then it holds. Your father used to say that about the first day of a new job, Sandra said. Every single time, even the 5th job, even when he'd done it before. She paused. He would be so proud of you, Emily. I know, Emily said. And this time the knowing was not a deflection. It was just true. 3 weeks later, the incubator fund approved the Carter Project for initial development funding. The approval letter arrived in Emily's email on a Tuesday morning, a Tuesday which she noted with the private awareness of someone for whom Tuesdays carried weight, and she read it 3 times before she believed it. $40,000 in initial funding. Access to the university's fabrication lab, assignment of a faculty advisor from the mechanical engineering department, and in the final paragraph, a sentence that Dr. Ewan had apparently written herself. This project was selected not only for its technical merit, but for the clarity of its intended beneficiary. The committee found it unusual and admirable that a student project this early in development had such specific knowledge of who it was being built for. Emily forwarded the letter to her mother. She forwarded it to Maya. She sent a photo of the screen to Jack. His reply came in 4 minutes. Maria would have liked this. She sat with that for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and wrote to the 11 names on the folded paper. The first meeting of what would eventually become the Carter Walker Foundation, though it did not have that name yet, did not have any formal name yet, was at this stage just 8 people around a table in the engineering department's conference room, happened on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the conduct board's preliminary findings. Garrett was there with his white beard and his 27 years of high school history and his specific way of asking questions that made the person answering them think harder than they'd intended to. 2 of the engineers from Jack's chapter were there, a man named Dennis, who had spent 30 years in aerospace fabrication, and another named Roy, who had done medical device work and had opinions about composite materials that he was barely containing by the time they sat down. Doctor, Ewan came as an observer. Maya came because Emily asked her to, and because Maya had, in the 6 weeks since the parking lot, become the kind of person she had not been before present, committed the conversion of guilt into something that actually helped rather than just confessing. Jack came last, arriving 7 minutes after everyone else, which Emily now understood was not lateness, but a deliberate habit. He preferred to walk into a room that was already occupied to let others establish themselves before he added his own weight to the space. He sat down and looked around the table. Emily's running this, he said to the room before anything else was said. I want to make sure everyone understands that from the start. This is her project, her vision. We are resources she is choosing to use, not the other way around. Dennis, who had strong opinions about composite materials and about many other things, looked like he might contest this on principle, then looked at Emily, then looked back at Jack and said, understood. Emily laid out the project. She walked them through the design concepts, the manufacturing targets, the distribution model. Roy interrupted 7 times with technical questions, each of which Emily answered with enough specificity that by the 4th interruption, Roy had stopped interrupting and started taking notes. Dennis suggested 3 material substitutions that would reduce cost without compromising structural integrity, and then immediately contradicted himself on the 3rd one when Roy pointed out a fatigue stress problem, and the 2 of them argued about it in the productive way that engineers argue when they are both right about different things. Garrett watched all of this with the expression of a man watching something being built and understanding what it was becoming before the people building it did. Emily watched the argument between Dennis and Roy and felt something she had not felt in the 2 years she had been carrying this project alone in a private folder on her laptop and in the margins of everything else. She felt the project getting bigger than her. That was the thing she had not understood about asking for help. She had thought it would make her smaller, that sharing the project would dilute. It would redistribute the ownership until the thing she had made became something she no longer fully recognized. She had been wrong. The project was getting bigger than her, and that was not loss. That was the whole point. That was what the project had always needed to be. After the meeting, she and Jack stood in the hallway outside the conference room, while the others were still inside, arguing productively about fatigue stress tolerances. Roy and Dennis are going to be a problem, she said. Roy and Dennis are going to be exactly what you need, Jack said. People who argue in good faith about technical problems are more useful than people who agree pleasantly about everything. You learn the difference eventually. What if the project doesn't work, she said. Not anxiously, honestly. The honest version of the fear that lived underneath every large undertaking. What if the design doesn't land where I think it will? What if the manufacturing cost is higher than the model? What if the distribution doesn't reach the families it's supposed to reach? Then you find out which part didn't work and you fix that part, Jack said. That's what the process is for. It sounds simple when you say it. It's not simple, he said, but it is straightforward. Simple and straightforward are different things. She thought about this. My father would have said something like that. Your father sounds like he understood things clearly, Jack said. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't get credited enough. She nodded. They stood in the hallway and listened to Roy and Dennis through the closed door. Reaching it sounded like some version of an agreement because the tone had shifted from debate to collaboration, which had its own distinct sound. I need to tell you something, Emily said. Okay. When you drove into the parking lot that afternoon, I almost didn't look up. I almost just kept trying to figure out the logistics of getting home. I heard the engine and I thought background noise. I almost let you be background noise. Jack considered this. Most people do, he said. That's not a criticism. When you've been managing everything alone for long enough, you stop expecting things to show up. It's rational given the evidence. I'm glad I looked up, Emily said. Me too, he said. They went back in. The prototype was finished 11 months after the first meeting around the engineering conference room table. Emily had taken a leave of absence from her grocery store job, which Gerald had granted without hesitation, and with the specific warmth of a man who had watched someone work very hard for a long time and was genuinely pleased to see the work going somewhere. She had moved into the fabrication lab for what felt like weeks at a stretch, had fought with the design 17 times and changed it. 11 of those times had called Roy at 11 o'clock at night with questions about composite layering that he answered with the patience of a man who was constitutionally incapable of leaving a technical question unanswered, regardless of the hour. Dennis drove the per-unit cost down twice through materials substitutions that required Emily to rethink sections of the design, but that each time produced something better than what had been there before. Dr. Ewan checked in monthly with the kind of oversight that was genuinely useful, rather than administrative questions that tested the model, that found the gaps, that treated Emily's work as something worth rigorously examining. The distribution model had required the most rethinking. Emily's original concept had been built around a subsidy system that she had designed from the engineering side without fully accounting for the nonprofit compliance requirements. Garrett had connections because Garrett, like Jack, had been accumulating people for decades, and two of those connections were a healthcare nonprofit lawyer and a woman who ran a pediatric adaptive equipment organization in the next state, and who, when Emily sent her the prototype specs, called back within 3 hours and said, "When can I come see this?" Her name was Dr. Christine Adler, and she had been trying to solve the affordability problem in pediatric mobility equipment for 14 years. And when she walked into the fabrication lab and picked up the prototype crutch and adjusted the grip and then adjusted the angle and then stood there for a moment running her thumb along the composite shaft, she looked at Emily and said, "Do you know how long I've been waiting for someone to build this correctly?" "Tell me what's wrong with it," Emily said. Dr. Adler's eyebrows went up. "Most people don't lead with that. I'd rather know now than later." Dr. Adler looked at her for a moment with the specific respect of one person recognizing another who shares their operating principles. Then she sat down and told Emily everything that was wrong with it. 3 things were wrong with it. 2 were fixable within the current design. 1 required a rethinking of the wrist support geometry that cost Emily 6 weeks, and 1 spectacular failure in the fabrication lab at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night that she did not tell anyone about until much later. She fixed all 3. When the revised prototype was done, Dr. Adler came back. She picked it up. She made the same adjustments. She stood with it for a longer moment this time. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Emily said. "I want to talk about a partnership," Dr. Adler said. "My organization has distribution relationships in 11 states. We have been looking for a product worth distributing for years. We have been finding products that are either well-designed and unaffordable or affordable and inadequate." She set the prototype down carefully, the way you set down something you're already thinking of as important. "This is neither of those things." Emily held that for a moment. "I need to tell my team," Emily said, "and I need to tell Jack." "Who's Jack?" Emily thought about how to answer that. She thought about all the words she could use: partner, mentor, friend, the man who stopped, and none of them fully covered it, because what Jack Walker was to her did not have an existing category. He was the person who had knelt in the mud. He was the person who had sent a message at midnight. He was the person who had said "you won't" and meant it so completely that she had believed it in the specific way you believe things that don't require proof. "He's the reason this exists," she said. She called him from the parking lot of the fabrication building. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which was unusual. Jack almost always picked up sooner, and when he answered, there was background noise that sounded like a highway. "Are you riding?" she said. "Long trip, few days out, everything okay?" "Dr. Adler wants to partner, 11-state distribution. She said the prototype is what she's been looking for." Silence on the line. The highway noise continued. "Jack?" "I heard you," he said. His voice had a quality she had only heard once before, briefly, when he had said Maria's name in her kitchen 14 months ago. "Say something," she said. "I'm trying to figure out the right thing to say." "Say the first thing." The first thing he said is that Maria would have given anything to have something like this when she was 9 years old. "And the second thing is that you built it. Not me, not Garrett, not Roy and Dennis. You." His voice was steady, and something else underneath the steadiness, something that had been carried for a long time and was being carefully held. And the third thing is that your father would absolutely not be able to stop talking about this to every single person he met for the rest of his life. Emily laughed. The real kind, the involuntary kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than humor. Come home soon, she said. Few more days, he said. I'll be there. She went back inside and told Dr. Adler yes. Sham. The public launch of the Carter Walker Foundation happened 8 months after the partnership agreement with Dr. Adler's organization was signed. Emily had not wanted to name it after Jack. She had argued about this for 3 weeks, had presented 4 alternative names, had explained carefully and at length that the foundation was about the work and not about the people behind it, and that putting 2 names on it ran the risk of making it about a story rather than about the thing the story had produced. Jack had listened to all of this with his characteristic patience and then said, "You're right that it should be about the work, but the names are for the people the work is for. Not for us." He paused. Maria's full name was Maria Carter Walker. "Did I ever tell you that?" Emily stared at him. "She was adopted," he said, "by our family when she was 4. Her birth name was Carter." The silence in the room lasted a long time. "You never told me that," Emily said. "No," he said. "I was waiting for the right moment." Emily looked at him, then at the 4 alternative names on the paper in front of her. Then back at him. "Carter Walker Foundation," she said. "If you want," Jack said. "It was always the right name," she said. "We just didn't know why yet." The launch event was held in the university's main hall, which Patricia Holloway had offered without conditions. Dr. Ewan was there. Garrett was there with 12 other members of various chapters who had ridden in from different states, not because they had been asked to make a statement, but because this was the kind of thing that mattered to them now that they had made matter to them, and presence was how they expressed that. Dr. Adler presented the distribution partnership and the initial list of families in 6 states who had already been matched with the first production run of the Crutches. Sandra Carter sat in the front row in a blue dress she had bought specifically for this and spent the entire first hour crying quietly in the specific way of a woman who is so happy that the happiness has nowhere else to go. Emily spoke last. She had written a speech. She had worked on it for 2 weeks, had revised it 11 times, had read it to Maya at midnight, 3 days before the event, and Maya had said it was good, and Emily had said it felt like a speech, and Maya had said, "Then throw it away and just talk." Emily had thought about this advice for 3 days and had ultimately done. Neither she had kept the structure and thrown away the language and started over with words that felt like hers. She stood at the podium with Bobby's aluminum crutches. She had kept them, had not returned them to Bobby, who had told her when she tried that they were a gift and gifts did not get returned, and she had kept them because they had carried her through the weeks when nothing was certain, and that deserved to be remembered. And she looked out at the room. "I want to start," she said, "by saying something that took me a long time to learn how to say, which is thank you, not as a formality, as the real thing, as the acknowledgement of a debt that cannot be repaid but must be named because naming it is how we keep it honest." She paused. 14 months ago, I was sitting in a parking lot in the mud. I had just lost something I had spent 8 months saving for. I was surrounded by people who were watching and not moving. And I had been telling myself for 5 years that that was the deal, that independence meant not needing anyone, and not needing anyone meant not being vulnerable, and not being vulnerable meant I was okay. She let that sit. I was not okay. I was alone. There is a difference, and it took a man kneeling in the mud beside me to make me understand it. Jack, who was sitting 3 rows back and had explicitly requested a seat that was not visible from the podium so that he could not be pointed at during the speech, was looking at a spot slightly to the left of the floor. His jaw was doing the thing it did. "The Carter Walker Foundation exists because of that difference," Emily continued. "It exists because one person stopped when 30 people didn't, and because that one person had 130 brothers who decided that a young woman they had never met deserved to know she wasn't standing alone. And because a dean opened an investigation the same day instead of the next week. And because a student walked into a security office with 38 seconds of video that he should have brought sooner, but brought when it mattered. And because my mother drove 3 hours the night before and slept on my couch and sat with me without needing me to be fine." She looked at Sandra. Sandra put her hand over her mouth. "None of those things were large things," Emily said. "They were all small things. The decision to stop, the decision to show up, the decision to tell the truth about what you saw, the decision to drive 3 hours. Small decisions made one at a time by people who decided that someone else's situation was their business after all. She looked out at the room. This foundation is going to make mobility equipment for children whose families cannot afford the equipment that would actually fit them. That is the work. That is the only reason any of us are in this room. And I want to tell those families, the ones who are already matched with the first production run, and the ones who will come after that, the equipment we are sending them was built by people who understand what it costs to need something the world has decided is too expensive to give you. She stopped. She had one more thing to say, and she had not written it, had not rehearsed it, had known she would say it, and trusted that the words would be there when she reached the end. My father's name was Daniel Carter, she said. He died on a Tuesday morning when I was 17 years old in an accident that was no one's fault and took everything. I have been carrying him with me every day since then, in the way I work, in the reason I work in the project that has his name on it, and always did even before I knew why. She looked at the podium for a moment, then up. Maria Walker died 8 years ago. She spent her life using equipment that wasn't right for her because the right equipment cost too much. She has his name on it too now, because she was a Carter, which I did not know until 3 weeks ago, and because sometimes the world is not as random as it looks. She let that sit. This is what they built, she said, from the broken pieces, from a parking lot in the rain, in 8 months of rice and beans, in a midnight message, and a daughter who finally stopped pretending she was fine. This is what they built, and it is going to put the right equipment in the hands of children who deserve it, and it is going to keep doing that for as long as there are people willing to stop when the easy thing is to keep driving. She stepped back from the podium. The room was not immediately loud. It filled the way rooms fill when something has landed fully, not with the quick, reactive applause of performance, but with the slower, deeper sound of people who have been moved and are acknowledging it with their whole bodies. Jack Walker stood up. He did not lead the applause. He simply stood, which was different, which was the thing she saw first across the room, the man in the third row standing with his hands at his sides and his face doing all the things his face was not accustomed to doing in public. And Emily looked at him, and he looked at her, and there was no transaction in it, no debt, no ledger. Just the recognition of two people who had met in the mud and built something that was bigger than either of them. Sandra Carter was on her feet. Garrett was on his feet. Maya was on her feet with both hands pressed against her face. Dr. Adler was clapping with the particular energy of a woman who had been waiting 14 years for this moment and was not going to be restrained about it. Emily stood at the podium and felt for the first time in her adult life not the weight of what she was carrying, but the shape of what she had built. She thought about Tuesday mornings, about pretzels and arguments, about music and the truck from the side street that changed everything, about a parking lot in the rain and 50 witnesses and one engine that slowed and stopped, about a bandana and a mug rinsed on a drying rack and 2 words that held you won't. She thought about 11 names on a folded piece of paper and a 60% weight reduction in composite materials and a 9-year-old girl with spina bifida whose father drove 6 hours because he needed his daughter to live in a world where someone shows up. She thought about Maria Carter Walker, who had needed equipment that fit and had not received it, whose name was now on a foundation that was going to spend the next decades making sure the next Maria received exactly what she needed. She thought about her father. She thought, Dad, look what we made. The girl who had spent 5 years refusing to ask for help had learned in 14 months the only thing that outweighs independence, and it was not need, and it was not weakness, and it was not the admission that you cannot do everything alone. It was the understanding that the things worth building are always too large for one person. That the right kind of strength is not the strength that refuses every offered hand. It is the strength that knows when to take one and what to build when you do. Emily Carter stood in a room full of people who had each in their own small way decided to stop and close the distance. And she understood completely and without reservation that the life she was living now was not the life that had been handed back to her after the accident. It was not a recovery or a restoration or a return to something that had been lost. It was something entirely new. Something that could only have been built from the breaking, and it was going to stand. Clay came back to the church at 5:30 in the morning, before the others were awake, before the town was moving, before anyone could ask him to explain something he didn't yet have an explanation for. He brought a pry bar. a hammer, a high-lumen work light on a battery pack, and the original 1887 construction documents from the vestry boxes which he spread across the nearest pew and studied in the beam of his flashlight until he had them memorized. The floor plan showed the main sanctuary, the vestry, the bell tower stairwell, the crawl space access at the rear. It showed the altar platform as a solid rectangle of concrete poured directly on grade. No room beneath, no chamber, no anything. But the cold air was still coming. He pressed his palm flat to the altar platform floor and felt it again deep and steady, the kind of cold that doesn't change when you touch it because it isn't coming from the surface. It was coming from below, from something the 1887 records had no record of. Clay picked up the pry bar and made a decision. He put the flat end into the gap he'd found the night before, running along the inner edge of the altar platform, and pressed down slowly. The wood gave a long, low creak, the sound of something that had been sealed for a very long time and did not want to be opened. He pressed harder. A 4-foot section of tongue and groove hardwood shifted cleanly as though it had been fitted into a frame designed to move. He got his fingers under it and pulled. It came free in one piece. Behind it was a handle, cast iron, bolted to a door set flush with the concrete 3 feet by 4 feet hinged at the bottom. Clay stared at it. He did not touch it yet. He went to the front of the sanctuary lawn, opened the main door, and called Mason. Mason picked up on the second ring voice, rough with sleep. "It's 5:30 in the morning. I know what time it is." A pause. 11 years of riding together, and Mason knew that particular tone, the one that meant this was not casual and was not a request. 20 minutes, Mason said. "Make it 15. Mason made it 12. He came through the door, still pulling on his jacket, and found Clay standing in front of the altar platform with the work light aimed at the cast iron handle in the floor. Mason stopped walking. He looked at the handle. He looked at Clay. He looked at the handle again. "That wasn't in the construction record," so he said, "No, sorry. How long have you known about this?" "Found the draft last night. Found the door this morning." Mason crouched and studied the handle without touching it. Then he stood back up, put his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at Clay with the steady, unhurried expression of a man who has learned not to waste energy on surprise. "Okay," he said, "open it." Clay gripped the handle, cold metal, deep cold, the kind that lives in things that have been sealed underground for decades. He braced his foot against the platform edge and pulled with his back and his arms together, and the door came up with a rush of displaced air that hit them both in the face. Old cold stone, cold, the smell of sealed space and deep time, and something else underneath it that Clay couldn't name yet. They both stood there looking down. Concrete steps, narrow cut into the earth, 8 of them disappearing into dark. "I'm going down," Clay said. "Obviously," Mason said. Clay went first, testing each step. Mason followed with his flashlight. At the bottom, they both stood still and got their bearings. The chamber was not large, 15 feet by 20, Clay estimated. Reinforced concrete walls poured in sections, the work of someone who knew what they were doing and had the resources to do it right. This was not a root cellar, not an accident of construction. This was built with intention. The walls had industrial shelving bolted directly to the concrete angle iron and wooden boards. On the shelves were cardboard boxes, dozens of them, and 2 4-drawer steel filing cabinets with institutional locks that hadn't been manufactured since the 1970s. And against the far wall, behind everything else, was a steel door, solid, frame-mounted. The lock mechanism looked like something off a bank vault. Mason let out a long, slow breath. "A church," he said. "A church in a mountain town in West Virginia. $46. "Yeah," Clay said. "What are we standing in right now?" "I don't know yet." He walked to the nearest shelf and read the box labels. Faded marker dates going back to 1943, the most recent from 1978. He opened the closest one and took out a folder. Inside were handwritten letters, typed documents on letterhead, what looked like contracts. He opened one letter and tilted it toward the light. The handwriting was formal and careful, the penmanship of someone educated before the war. Addressed to Reverend Harold Beam, Clay had seen that name in the church records, pastor from 1941 to 1967. Signed by a man named Chester Mosby. It began, "Reverend per hour agreement regarding the families in question. The arrangements have been completed as discussed, and the documentation will be held as previously agreed at the location we established. Clay read it twice, then a third time. He set it down carefully and looked at Mason. "Get Duke," he said. "Duke and Rama, just Duke." Duke Fontaine arrived at 7:15 and came down the stairs without hurrying, which was how Duke did everything. 57 years old Vietnam veteran, the most deliberate man Clay had ever known. He stood beside Clay and read the letter once. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "How many boxes?" 43 on the shelves. "Cabinets aren't open. And there's that door." Duke looked at the steel door. "What's behind it?" "Don't know. Lock's serious." Duke was quiet in the way he got when he was organizing his thoughts into something useful. "Clay," he said finally, "I need you to think carefully about the next step." "I'm thinking. Because whatever's in those boxes, once you open it, you own it. You can't unknow a thing." He paused. "Some things, when you pull the thread, the whole garment comes apart. Sometimes the garment was holding something together that should have come apart a long time ago. But you need to know which one this is before you pull." "I read the letter," Clay said. "Mosby wrote the families in question, plural, and arrangements, and he said the documentation would be held at the location they'd established. This is the location, Duke. This is where they kept it all." "Kept what, though?" "That's why I need to open the rest." Duke looked at him for another long moment. Then he said, "Okay, but we do this carefully, and nobody outside this room knows anything until we understand what we have." "Agreed." "Not Ryan, not yet." "Not yet," Clay said. They went to the boxes. They worked through the morning in the cold of the chamber, moving methodically, reading carefully, setting aside what they couldn't immediately interpret, and returning to it. By 10 o'clock, they had a shape. It wasn't complete. There were gaps, boxes still to open, documents too faded to read. But the shape was there, and it was this. Between approximately 1943 and 1971, a group of prominent men in Silver Creek had systematically targeted families in financial crisis. The mechanism was property. When families fell behind on land payments or mortgages, these men moved with a legal precision that left the families no recourse. Properties changed hands for amounts that bore no relationship to their value. Records were altered. In some cases, Clay found what appeared to be forged signatures on transfer documents. And Reverend Beam in St. Matthew Church had been the instrument of it. In a small mountain community in the 1940s and 1950s, the church was not just a place of worship. It was the social center, the moral authority, the institution that people trusted when they trusted nothing else. When families in crisis had come to Beam for help, he had directed them gently with the full weight of pastoral care directly into the hands of the men who were waiting to take what they had. Mason had come down without being called around 9, having figured out on his own that something significant was happening. He was sitting on an upturned crate with a folder open in his lap, his face arranged in the expression he got when he was working hard to stay even. "These are the family's own records," he said. "These are the letters they sent. Someone Beam, one of the others, collected everything. Every piece of paper that could have been used as evidence." "They weren't destroying it," Duke said. "No," Clay said. "Oh." The answer arrived fully formed the moment the thought connected. Leverage, not just documenting what happened, using it. If any of these families tried to push back, tried to go to the authorities, tried to make noise, Beam had everything. He had the paper trail that could be turned around to make the families look like the problem. Delinquent debtors, troublemakers, whatever they needed. Mason looked at the folder in his lap. "There's a family named Cutter, lost 40 acres in 1949. And there's a letter from the Yief, Eleanor Cutter, addressed to the county recorder. Says she has proof the signature on the transfer deed is not her husband's. Says she has witnesses." He looked up. "And then there's a letter from Chester Mosby to Beam." 2 weeks later, same month Eleanor Cutter's letter would have been received. Mason's voice went flat. "It says the matter of the Cutter woman has been addressed. She will not be proceeding further. Her husband has been spoken to." The chamber went completely silent. "Spoken to," Duke said. "That's what it says." Nobody spoke for a moment. The cold pressed in around them. Clay looked at the steel door against the far wall and thought about what "spoken to" meant in a mountain town in 1949, when the men who could destroy your livelihood were also the men who sat in the front pew every Sunday. Keep going, he said. Ryan had been patient for as long as Ryan was capable of being patient, which turned out to be 4 hours. He came to the church door and knocked hard on the frame. Clay! Clay came up from the chamber, latched the floor panel behind him, and met Ryan in the doorway. Ryan looked at his face and read it immediately. He was good at that. When you spent your childhood in a system where reading faces was survival, you didn't unlearn it. What did you find? Ryan said. Something I'm still working through. That's not an answer. I know it isn't. Ryan crossed his arms. His jaw was set. You locking me out of this? Not locking you out, Clay said. Giving it until this afternoon. We have more to go through. This is bad, isn't it? It's not good, but I don't know the full shape of it yet. Ryan looked past him into the sanctuary. His eyes went